Hello and welcome to the video lecture on An Honest Thief by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Fyodor Dostoevsky was a Russian novelist, philosopher, short story writer, essayist, and journalist. He was born in Russia in 1821 and he passed away in 1881 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Dostoevsky's literary works explore human psychology in the troubled political, social, and spiritual atmospheres of the 19th century Russia and engage with a variety of philosophical and religious themes. His most acclaimed novels include Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. These major works are also renowned as great novels of ideas that treat timeless and timely issues in philosophy and politics. Novels of ideas are different from the usual novels. It is a novel whose story explores a particular idea or a philosophical perspective on the world. It talks about philosophy, it talks about the philosophical inclinations of human beings. It basically explores philosophical philosophy. That is what is novels of ideas. Okay, so most of Dostoevsky's novels are explorations of philosophy. As we talked about earlier, his works engage with philosophical and religious themes. Dostoevsky's body of works consists of 12 novels, 4 novellas, 16 short stories, and numerous other works. His philosophical penetration into the darkest recesses of the human heart, together with his unsurpassed moments of illumination, had an immense influence on 20th century fiction. His works are often called prophetic because he so accurately predicted how Russia's revolutionaries would behave if they came to power. He specialized in the analysis of pathological states of mind that led to insanity, murder, and suicide, and the exploration of the emotions of humiliation, self destruction, tyrannical domination, and murderous rage. So it's not just about the goodness of human being. Dostoevsky was not speaking about the pleasant philosophies of life. He delved into the dark recesses of the human heart, and he talked about rage, he talked about murder, he talked about revenge, he talked about humiliation that led to this rage, he talked about insanity. Everything that was dark in human mind, he talked about them. Psychology and philosophy are closely linked in Dostoevsky's portrayals of intellectuals who feel ideas in the depth of their souls. For example, if you ever get to read Brothers Karamazov written by Fyodor Dostoevsky, you will understand that there's a character called Ivan, and when there is a conversation that happens between Ivan and another character, he goes on for pages and pages about the philosophies of life. Okay, so psychology and philosophy are something that Dostoevsky wrote a lot about in his novels. Finally, his novels broke new ground with their experiments in literary forms. He did not follow the form of writing that was prevalent in the 20th century. He explored new ways of expressing his ideas. Many literary critics rate him as one of the greatest novelists in all of world literature, as multiple of his works are considered highly influential masterpieces. Almost all his works are considered to be classics because the emotions that he describes in them, the philosophy that he talks about in them, the feelings that he talks about, all those feelings and emotions and philosophies are prevalent, even are important to talk about even in the 21st century. So that's exactly why his works are considered to be classics. So today we are going to look at one of his short stories called An Honest Thief. An Honest Thief was written in 1848. It was published at a time when Fyodor Dostoevsky was already almost popular. He was known among the literary circles of St. Petersburg. An Honest Thief was part of a series of short stories that were published in the magazine Annals of the Fatherland. The story recounts the tale of the tragic drunkard Emelian Ilyich. It shows Dostoevsky's in-depth knowledge of psychology as well as the mental, social, cultural and political condition of Russia of his time. So if you have read the short story, you will understand that it is not about the story of Emelian Ilyich alone. It is also about the political condition, the social condition that was prevalent in the period in Russia. So this is the plot. So after his landlord experiences a break-in and theft, Astafy Ivanovich tells the landlord the tragic story of a man named Emilian Ilyich, an honest thief he once knew and whose livelihood Astafy once found himself responsible for. Okay, Ivanovich, usually all the Russian names, the male Russian names end with Nich, which means son of. So Ivanovich is the son of Ivan. Okay, so this is the story that Astafy narrates, even though the story begins with the narrator. We don't know his name. He talks about Astafy Ivanovich. He talks about a theft that happens in the house, and then he narrates this theft to the tenant that he's staying with, and that is Astafy. So Astafy also starts narrating the story of a thief that he knows about, and that thief, Emilian Ilyich, is the honest thief, as we'll come to know by the end of the story. So the narrator's coat is stolen in broad daylight right in front of him, and the thieves get away. This sends Astafy into a flashback that goes on for the rest of the story. Astafy explains how a poor old drunken man named Emilian Ilyich becomes his unwanted companion and follows him around from home to home. One day, Astafy's breeches are stolen, and Emilian is the first accused of this. Emilian refuses all allegations, and Astafy knows he is guilty, but he defends him for the sake of keeping the peace. The guilt starts to eat up Emilian's spirit to the point he gets physically sick. He eventually dies, but not before he tells Astafy the truth about his breeches, which ends the story. So we understand that another theft happens. The breeches are stolen from Astafy, and Emilian is the first one, is the first suspect, but Emilian denies the accusation. But later it is revealed that it was Emilian himself who stole the breeches, but the guilt of having lied to his friend or his supporter has eaten him up. The guilt of robbing him, the guilt of lying to him, all these guilt has eaten him up from inside, and finally he falls ill and he dies. And before he dies, he tells Astafy the truth, and that's the story of uh, an honest thief. Okay, so the setting. So where does the story happen? There are two places. One is the landlord's house, and the other is the rented room in the nurse's home. So in the landlord's house is where the first action takes place. The first robbery takes place, where the coat is stolen. That is occupied by the landlord, who is the first narrator, and then it is occupied by Astafy and Agrafena, who is the nurse. So this is where the first narration happens. This is where the first action happens. Then the next setting is the rented room in the nurse's home, which was occupied by Astafy and Emilian. And the second narrative happens here. This rented room we come to know from the narration of Astafy. And the second action takes place here, where the second robbery happens. The stealing of the breeches happens in the rented room in the nurse's home. So these are the basic themes of the short story: guilt, conscience, loneliness, addiction, forgiveness, and the importance of honesty. So guilt and conscience we understand from the narration that happens about Emilian Ilyich. The guilt that he feels of having lied to the person, the guilt he feels of having stolen from the person who was his basic caregiver. So all these ideas are discussed in detail by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Okay, the guilt and the guilty conscience that Emilian Ilyich feels, the loneliness, addiction. Okay, those are again the things that are related to Emilian Ilyich. The loneliness that he feels, that he is drawn towards Astafy. He never leaves Astafy alone. As Astafy moves from one place to another, Emilian keeps following him. And addiction, and the money that Emilian has been giving the money that Astafy has been giving Emilian uses to drink alcohol. And it also talks about the social condition that was prevalent in Russia, that made people absolutely poor, and they could not depend on anybody, so they kept on the desperate situation that people were in, so which made them addicted to alcohol. And it talks about forgiveness from the perspective of Astafy again. Astafy, with the full knowledge that it was Emilian who stole from him, he decided to forgive Emilian. Okay, even at his deathbed, even when Emilian confesses that it was he who stole the breeches, Astaphy does not rebuke him, does not scold him, does not leave him. He takes care of him, and that talks about the idea of forgiveness and the importance of honesty. So most of the themes are from the perspective of Emilian, and one thing that we need to understand is or everything talks about it's not just a story of three people, the narrator Astaphy and Emilian. It is also about the emotions that these people feel, the feeling of betrayal that they feel when things get stolen from them, the idea that people could steal from them, the idea of desperate situation in people's life that would make them steal from others just to drink alcohol. So all these ideas, the social situations, the feelings that happen in people's minds, all these things are discussed in An Honest Thief. So these are the main characters of the story. The first one we get to meet is landlord. The landlord is the narrator of the story. He's lonely and is of considerable stature in society. He lives alone in his house, and it was his nurse Agrafena who suggested, or the housekeeper Agrafena who suggested that he takes in a tenant. Besides tale telling, he has little other business in the development of the plot. So he's just a catalyst in the sense that it was he who was stolen from in the beginning, and it was because he narrated the story of theft that the other narration happened. So other than that, he doesn't have any other role in the story. It was his jacket which got stolen, the incident which catalyzes the latter part of the narration, the story of the protagonist. Then we get to see Agrafena, who's the housekeeper, the elderly domestic help who stays in the narrator's house, and she is the one who suggested that the landlord takes in a new tenant so that he will have some company. In narrator's own words, a silent, simple creature that, except her daily inquiry about dinner, not allowed, she had not uttered a word for the last 6 years. Okay, so if we read the story, we understand that in the beginning itself, when Agrafena suggests that he takes in a new person as tenant, we realize the astonishment from the landlord's part when he says that in the past 6 years she hasn't uttered a single word, and this is the first time she's been saying anything else other than that is related to the kitchen. It was her idea to rent out the narrator's apartment to Astaphy Ivanovich. Then the two main characters are Astaphy Ivanovich and Emilian Ilyich. Astaphy Ivanovich is an elderly gentleman, a former soldier, a practicing tailor, and the renter of the house. So we understand, a former soldier comes back home to become a tailor. It talks about the social condition that was prevalent in Russia. Okay? And he's renter of the house, and on the recommendation of Agrafena moves in as a boarder in the narrator's apartment. He is the narrator of the second sequence of events, and he is very sentimental. He is very attached to Emilian, and he is unable to throw him out even though the drunkard had robbed him, and he is aware of it. He is kind, helpful, and forgiving as revealed through his own narration. But he's an unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrator in the sense he's narrating a story, he's narrating his part, he's telling us what Emilian did and he did, but we are not very sure. Okay, he's an unreliable narrator. He tells us his story. We can only trust his story from his part. Emilian Ilyich is one referred to as Emelianoshka, the invariably inebriated. Inebriated is drunk. Virtuously underperforming prodigal protagonist who had to pay with his life to bring about the conclusion to the plot. So the conclusion happens with this man's death. Okay, he's a poor old drunkard. The image of a dog is used by Astaphy Ivanovich to characterize Emilian. So always dependent. As much as Astaphy moves, Emilian also moves. Wherever he goes, this one follows. So it's the imagery of a dog that is used to describe Emilian. The dog signifies Emilian Ilyich compelling attachment to Astaphy. Astaphy Ivanovich rapport with Emilian Ilyich is analogous to that of a man and his dependable dog. So this idea of a dog that is always used by Astaphy to describe the character of Emilian, and that's why he's we can actually question the kind of attachment that Astaphy feels towards Emilian. Point of view. So, point of view means from which perspective or from whose perspective is the story said. So, it is first person limited. In the sense, first person is I, it is I who tells the story, and it is limited because the I that narrates the story does not know everything. Okay, the landlord is the initial narrator of this story, but after the robbery, Astafy Ivanovich becomes a narrator of the inner core story. So, the first I that we see in the short story belongs to the narrator, and the second I that we see belongs to Astafy Ivanovich, and both of them have limited knowledge. We have read short stories and novels that are narrated from the third person perspective, in the sense the story will be he did this, he did that, and that is an omniscient narrator, and an omniscient narrator will know what is going to happen. ഒരു സിനിമ, if you watch a movie also, ഒരു സിനിമ കാണുമ്പം അത് തുടങ്ങുമ്പോൾ there will be a narration. Okay, this is this village, these are the people who reside here, but what is going to happen they don't know. ഇതെല്ലാം പറഞ്ഞിട്ടായിരിക്കും തുടങ്ങുന്നത്, which means that the narrator knows what is going to happen. But first person limited because this person who is narrating the story does not know what is going to happen. So both these I's, the first narrator, the landlord, or Astafy, who is the second narrator, they do not know what is going to happen. That is why it is first person limited. Thus, it is a dual narrator story, with the second plot being the main part of the short story. The primary narrative gives attention to the narrator, Agrafena, Astafy Ivanovich, and the thief who steals the narrator's coat. The main narrative updates the reader about narrator's introverted life. The main narrative is shorter than the meta narrative. Meta narrative is a narrative within a narrative. Okay, theater is a theater within a theater. Okay, metafiction is a fiction within a fiction. So this is a meta narrative where the first narrative happens and then the second narrative happens. If you know Udayananatharam, you might have watched the movie Udayananatharam. That's a movie within a movie. Okay, there's a movie that happens within the movie. Like that, we have a story that happens within a story, and that is called a meta narrative. Okay, so the main narrative is shorter than the meta narrative. The main narrative is the narrative that happens between the landlord and Astafy. That narrative is shorter than the narrative that happens between Astafy and Emilian. Okay, that is the meta narrative. The narrative that happens, that the story about Astafy and Emilian is the meta narrative. Okay, meta narrative because there's nothing more in the narrator's life other than the self-contained survival. Agrafena's routine, discreetness, and quotidian chores, the advent of Astafy Ivanovich, and the depth of the narrator's coat. So these are the things that happen in the main narrative, which is very short, and in the meta narrative, it's a story of Astafy and Emilian. The secondary narrative or the meta narrative by Astafy Ivanovich gives attention to his life and his relationship with Emilian Ilyich. It is in the second narrative that we get a detailed description of the protagonist of the story, Emilian Ilyich, who the story is about, and the title Honest Thief, as the title Honest Thief suggests. So the second narrative is about Emilian Ilyich, and Emilian Ilyich is the honest thief. Title and conflict. So the title is An Honest Thief, and when we read the story, we understand. It's only when we read the story we understand the meaning of an honest thief, because the honest thief itself is an oxymoron. A thief cannot be honest. The title of the story appears to be an oxymoron. Oxymoron is our combination of two words that do not get along, like honest thief. It is sweet revenge. Okay. Oxymoron, and represents a moral impossibility. Emilian is that honest thief, a man who steals yet whose repentance is deeply sincere. Throughout the story, Emilian is a thoroughly pathetic figure. Astafy tells how Emilian stays drunk for a fortnight, then sits wordlessly as though grief was gnawing at his heart, or as though he wanted to do for himself completely. Emilian's departure to the freezing streets is an act of self-punishment that further expresses his guilt. When he finally confesses to the theft just before dying, the reader feels that this character has genuine desire to live virtuously despite his failure to have done so. So throughout the story, we understand that Emilian is a drunkard. Emilian keeps on drinking away all the money that Astaphy gives. He steals from Astaphy, who's his caregiver. Even then, at the end of it, when as Fyodor Dostoevsky narrates, we understand that his repentance and his repentance was actually sincere. He was punishing himself for what he did, and it was his guilty conscience that made him fall ill and finally led to his death. And that's exactly why the oxymoron is the title, An Honest Thief. So Emilian becomes the honest thief. When then we talk about the symbols and images, the first symbol is the honest thief. So it's an allusion to the good thief in the Bible in the New Testament who confesses his sin when crucified on the cross with Jesus the Christ and who gains absolution from the Christ. So there are two thieves who are crucified with Jesus Christ. So there's a good thief and a bad thief. So just like the good thief, we have an honest thief here. Emilian also on his deathbed confesses to the stealing of the expensive breeches to Astaphy Ivanovich, who forgives him with all his heart. So the good thief asks Christ to remember him when he is in heaven with his father. So just like that, Emilian also confesses to Astaphy and tells him to forgive him. The title of the short story, not only pointing out to the New Testament's good thief, but also to the self-righteousness of Emilian to have a spot in Astaphy Ivanovich's life, like the good thief who wanted to be remembered by Jesus the Christ when Christ would enter his kingdom. The second symbol is that of a dog, as I mentioned earlier. There are many references to the word dog mentioned by Astaphy Ivanovich in relation to Emilian. Like a little dog, he would follow me wherever I went, there he would be. The dog signifies Emilian Ilyich's compelling attachment to Astaphy. Emilian acts like a dog who latches on to a person he adores for no reason in particular and then makes himself devoted to the person. So the image of a dog is basically used to characterize Emilian. So Emilian keeps on following Astaphy wherever he goes and kinds of a dog-like attachment towards Astaphy. Astaphy Ivanovich's rapport with Emilian Ilyich is analogous to that of a man and his dependable dog. I mentioned this earlier. So this is what is An Honest Thief about. Okay, thank you.